so much for joining us. Well, Edwin Edwards once teased his opponent David Treen by saying it takes him an hour and a half to watch 60 Minutes. Well, tonight, in the sparse space of 30 minutes, we will touch on what it would take days to discuss: the career of the late governor, whose 4 terms in office made him the state's longest-serving chief executive. Joining us are Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources; Tyler Bridges, political reporter, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate; and 2 journalistic veterans of the Edwards years: Norman Robinson, former news anchor WDSU TV Channel 6, and John Hill, former Baton Rouge Bureau Chief for Gannett News. All right, we're going to go on over to Errol first to just sort of give us the broad picture of Governor Edwin Edwards as politician.
There's so much to talk about. We're going to begin with a brief clip of the day he was first inaugurated governor, and see if you can notice anything unusual about this inauguration.
J'ai les obligations
comme gouverneur
de l'État de la Louisiane.
le mieux de mes habilités.
And as you can see, that was with the French governor. This is a standard shot of Edwards, like when he was first campaigning. Very handsome person. That was Edwards with his first wife, Elaine. And this is
Which is later in his career. He was just always so dapper. And of course, I mean, we should note that, the governor, Edwards, has passed away. And so we are dedicating this half hour to talk about him. He was a 4-term governor.
Anyway, and this was his wedding, to his last wedding. It was at the Montleon Hotel. And what was his last wife's name again?
Trina.
Trina, okay.
Yes.
And so anyway, just a little bit. You can see he was always a very dapper guy and full of personality. But the first thing about the French, and I think this is the key thing to understanding Edwin Edwards. Edwards was born in 1927. Now, what's significant about that year was that was the year of the Great Flood in Louisiana. I mean, like one of the traumatic events in Louisiana history was in 1927. He was born and raised in Marksville, which is almost the exact center of the state of Louisiana, and it's in the WYES parish. There was a lot of damage in that parish, as there was throughout a good bit of the state. So here he is, born in 1927, but also in 1927, the politics was going on for the 1928 gubernatorial election, and one of the candidates was a guy named Huey Long. And in 28, Huey Long would be elected. So here's this boy child, born after a flood in a parish that had a lot of flooding damage, and he's raised in an era where you're going to see an outburst of populism because the state was devastated. There were a lot of poor people. There were a lot of needy people. And so Huey Long would have been, as he was growing up, all the years when he was growing up, he would have been hearing about Huey Long and his populism. He'd have been seeing that style of politics that Huey Long pioneered. And Huey Long, if you look back today at Louisiana, the 2 most important governors, just in terms of the power that they wielded during their time, would have been Huey Long and Edwin Edwards. And so it was amazing. After a while, the styles changed a little bit. But being raised also in Marksville, Marksville is the WYES parish is the northern end of really French-speaking Louisiana. After that, you kind of move more into a southern drawl type of dialect. The area is less Catholic and less influenced. But they were speaking French in the WYES parish, and not Cajun French. And the fact is, Edwards' heritage was not really French. It was French Creole, which means that his ancestors, at least on his father's side, came directly from France and not through Nova Scotia, as the Cajuns did. But he learned to speak French. And that was a plus also. So the combination of those things, the political influence he had from the time and place that he was born, being born and raised in a French-speaking county, were all just really, really influential. And something else that became a big influence, he told a story that after he graduated from LSU Law School, he was trying to figure out where to have his law practice, and he wanted to go where there weren't many attorneys. And he was visiting his sister in Crowley, and he looked through her phone book, and he saw that there were hardly any attorneys at all there, especially French-speaking attorneys. He had planned to go to Marksville, where there were lots of attorneys because Marksville was a parish seat. But based on that phone book, he decided to go to Crowley. So he moves to Crowley, sets up his law firm, and then sees a lot of lawyers in Crowley. Says, what went wrong? And he realizes that somebody had torn some pages out of the phone book. And so based on that, he decided there. But if somebody was explaining to me, if you look at the growth of his political career, that Crowley was a tremendous base to grow up because there's a lot of money in Crowley. There was the rice industry, there was the oil industry, there was the Reggie family, which is very wealthy. And so to be an aspiring politician, there's a lot more money in Crowley than in Marksville. And so that happened also. You know, there's one other kind of quirk to the story that you don't hear much people talk about, but he was a Crowley city councilman and then a state senator. One year, the incumbent congressman, a guy named T.A. Thompson, was coming home, I think, for an Easter holiday, and he was stopped by a policeman, a state policeman in North Carolina, got out of his car, and there was a crash, and he was killed. So Congressman Thompson was killed. That created a special election, and it was in that special election that Edwards was elected. And being a special elected, it was a short election, which means people that had more name recognition helped. But that put Edwards on the map. Before that, people wouldn't have really heard of him. All of a sudden, he was one of the congressmen. So you could see he had all the bits and pieces that kind of fell in place for the career that was going to follow.
Well, he led a political life for really most of his life. He started at age 27. That was his first elected seat, I think, in Crowley.
He started off in the Crowley City Council, and then ran for the legislature, and then ran for congressman. And by his own admission, he once said that he wasn't a very good congressman. He was there like about 5 years, but he really didn't have his heart into it. That I think all the time that he was there, he was thinking about going back to Louisiana and was thinking about that governor's job.
All right, let's go on over to John right now. And John, in your job as a reporter for Gannett News, you covered Edwin Edwards during, his time in office, the governor's office. Did you cover him as congressman also?
Well, he was running, yes, while he was running for governor. That's when I met him in 1970 in Monroe while he was a congressman. Very little known outside his district down in Corrales. He was up there in Monroe trying to get some support, and the host of a fundraiser invited me over there, and just because I was the first political reporter they've ever had in Northeast Louisiana. Edwards comes around through the crowd, and he goes around through here, and he hits to me, and he thinks, reporter, thousands of newspaper readers. So he stops in his track, and he sits there, and he chats. He talks about anything. I asked whatever I asked. He stayed there, and finally the host came over and a little drunk and slapped his arm around me and said, "Governor Edwards, I guess you know you're talking to the #1 political reporter in Northeast Louisiana." Remember, I was the only one. And Edwards said, "Of course I do. Why do you think I'm standing here licking his Fast forward 25 years, and one day in the governor's mansion, after Edwards had told me I'm going to kick your ass when I get out of office in that 4th term, right towards the end, I had done something, I don't remember, actually covered his educational initiatives, which weren't bad during the middle of the gambling stuff, but nobody was covering them. He invited me over there, and he said, "I guess because your wife is a teacher, you're the only reporter in Baton Rouge that's interested in education." And so he answered my questions and got up and he said, "I guess it might interest you. I no longer plan to kick your ass when I leave office."
I'm sure you did breathe a sigh of relief then.
That's a good thing because I didn't want to go in training. And he said, "That's just it. Neither did I." I tell these stories because Edwin Edwards was totally disarming. He would say the things that other people didn't say. And they were funny. So we laughed. We laughed all through 4 terms of Edwin Edwards. He truly could have been a stand-up comic. And he told some senators once at the governor's mansion that he kind of envied television game show hosts because they made a lot of money, they got all the women they wanted, and they didn't have to work very hard. And so the senator told me this, and I said, "Well, what would be different about his life?" I mean, So, but he was so talented in working with the legislature. He did not lie to legislators. He gave them his word, and if he had to retract on support on something, he'd call the legislator and said, "I'm sorry, I had to reverse course on this right now for you, but I will make it up to you the very next opportunity I can." Edwin went to their weddings, he went to their funerals, he went to all their family events, and he told the truth to the legislators. They could bank on his word. That was his key to his success, is he paid attention to the legislature.
Let me ask you this, John. I mean, there are people out there, and here we are. We have a half hour that we're dedicating talking about this man who was governor 4 times in the state of Louisiana. There's just this Edwin mystique, but there are also people who are scratching their heads saying, why do people feel so fondly about him? What do you think?
He's a delightful rogue. He was a stand-up comic. He could have been a TV game host that everybody loved. He was just entertaining, very entertaining. You know, he always had some bon mot to say to make everybody laugh.
Yeah, he used to make fun of everybody, John, and he never took any occasion that seriously. I mean, he used to see me when I was covering stories out in the field, and he'd walk up and he would say to me, "You need to lay off the chocolate milk. It's interfering with your complexion." He was, and that's what made him, I guess that's what made him so lovable, because he was like, he treated people like they were part of the family. You know, he never met a stranger. And he always made people feel at ease. And he could tell a joke, as John said, that was so disarming, even if it was insulting, you know, you had to laugh because, you know.
I laughed at any of those insulting ones.
Yeah. Yeah. He teased me about the chocolate milk, and I teased him, but I'd say, you need to drink a little bit more white milk because you're not white enough.
Norman, let's stick with you right now, if we can. We're going to jump over to Norman, because you were a reporter asking questions at the infamous debate that that was held between him and David Duke, when they were both running for governor. What was 91? What was that like?
It was very tense. I think that was the first debate, and I drew the short straw, and I say short straw because that debate was held under the auspices of the Louisiana Public Broadcasting Network, and I was chosen to represent my station as one of the panelists, and they decided that they would divvy up among the panelists who would be asking questions of whom. And I happened to draw the short straw to interview David Duke. You know, I felt kind of uncomfortable about Duke because this is a picture after the debate that infamous debate that we held in Baton Rouge. This debate was held by Meet the Press at the time. The late Tim Russert was the moderator, and the smoke was still billowing from that infamous debate in Baton Rouge, and that's where Russert asked the infamous question to Duke. He asked Duke to name the key industries in Louisiana, and he couldn't do it.
It was the 3 biggest employers.
You remember that?
Yeah.
And he couldn't do it. And Edwards says, I can. But getting back to that infamous debate that we had in 1991 at LPB. I felt a little uncomfortable because I knew I had to ask them tough questions.
And you did. You pulled no punches for either of them, but particularly for Duke.
Yeah, and I knew I was going to get some backlash, but I had to do it. I didn't know whether I would have a job afterwards. But you know, I must be honest. I didn't know to the extent that I would go in asking my questions. But as I sat there facing him, and I was thinking of him as the former grand wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. And it was running through my mind at the time, the Dred Scott decision that the United States Supreme Court had levied that blacks were 3/5 human. And it ran through my mind the brutal murder of Emmett Till. And I was a child when that happened, and I was living in Mississippi, about 50 miles south of Philadelphia, where that incident took place. And all of those things boiled up inside me, and I thought I had no choice but to confront him, but to challenge him on his record. And I thought that being an African American, I had a special obligation to raise certain issues, and I did.
You did.
Yeah.
No doubt about that. And if anybody wants to see that debate, you can pull it up. Just Google it or go to C-SPAN. C-SPAN has the full debate, and it certainly is very, very interesting to watch. Of course, Edwards won that race and soundly defeated David Duke.
The interesting thing about that, though, Marcia, is that Duke managed to corral 55% of the white vote doing that. To me, that was pretty stunning.
It's pretty stunning and kind of scary, too.
Yeah.
Don't you think, Norm? Yeah, go watch that debate because it really is an interesting one to watch. Now, let's go over to Tyler right now. And you wrote about, you want to show the book? You have the book Bad Bat on the Bayou, which you published, what 20 years ago now.
I have that book.
Yeah, and this is about, Edwin, of course, was involved in gambling and, well, he loved to gamble, but then also the legalization of gambling here in the state, and you wrote about how that really got him into trouble, too.
Yeah, his gambling was both very important for him. He'd like to say that he didn't collect coins, stamps. His hobby was to gamble, and during his first couple of terms, reporters would ask him about him going to Las Vegas, and this speaks to what John said a couple of minutes ago. And another governor would try to deny that they went to Las Vegas, or I was just checking out something. And Edwards would say, yeah, I was out there gambling, had a great time, made a bunch of money, and why don't you come out with me the next time I'm going?
Yeah, he made no bones about that. I mean, he liked to gamble, and he would win, and he would also lose.
But let me jump in here.
Sure.
So, but the true extent of his gambling really became clear in his trials in the mid-1980s.
Right.
But some funny stories came out of it. He would sign what was called a marker, and he signed one. The marker said Ed Neff, and so when he was on the stand, the prosecutor said, well, why did you sign the marker Ed Neff? And Edwards says, oh, I wrote enough. And the guy just got it wrong, and I had gambled enough money that day and lost, and I just said enough. But he also had to testify that an executive from Caesars came to pick up a suitcase from the governor's mansion to pay a debt of $400,000 of Edwards on one occasion and $380,000 on another occasion. So he lost a lot of money, but once the trial was over in 1986, he made the call for that New Orleans should become a mecca of gambling. And then, of course, he won that governor's race in 1991 that Norma was talking about, and I really do encourage anybody to watch that debate. It was really, really riveting, and also to see how Norman kind of stepped out of the traditional role of a moderator, a questioner, to really go after Duke in a really, I think, admirable way. But again, so Edwards wins that 91 governor's race, and his biggest issue was to bring a single land casino to New Orleans, and that happened. And then gambling becomes a continuing part of the story after he leaves office in 1996. He ends up getting indicted, goes on trial, and he's convicted of extorting businessmen who were trying to get licenses to operate riverboat casinos in Louisiana. So he ended up spending 8.5 years. So gambling, which he always said was his hobby, ended up being his downfall.
Now, he was sentenced to 10 years, and I have read that it was thought that was a life sentence. Of course, he outlived that.
Yeah, people thought when he went away at 75 years old that he probably would not survive his prison term, but he came out of it. This is sort of typical Edwin Edwards, the guy that John and Norman both talked about. He seemed more resilient than ever. He was invited all over the state to give speeches, and women would come up to him and give him a kiss, even Republican women. Everyone would laugh at his jokes. He ended up running for Congress in 2014. He knew he couldn't win the race in Baton Rouge because it was a Republican-drawn seat, but he got even more attention. And at his 90th birthday party, which I attended in Baton Rouge, he said that morning he had woken up and taken his 5-year-old son to preschool.
That's pretty amazing, isn't it? And of course, when he was in prison, that's when he met his third wife, Trina, the mother of that 5-year-old son. All told, he had 3 marriages, right?
Right.
Elaine, and then Candy Piku, and his final wife, Trina.
Right.
So just a man with a very, very colorful life across the board, a man who leaves behind children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, too, quite a long life. So all of you guys I know have stories about Edwin Edwards. Let's go around the table, and you each have about a minute and a half, minute 45 or so to tell your tale. E, let's start with you.
Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge that we've talked about him being lovable. I don't think everybody really loved him, but he was fun to watch, all right? And I think he was a lovable rogue more than anything else. But we should mention that there was, if you had to pick the major accomplishment out of his administrations, and that was the new Constitution. That wasn't his first term. and the state was bogged down, and it really needed a new constitution. There'd be many attempts at it, and he got it going, and he really changed. That was a major moment in the state's government and the politics for doing that. Also in New Orleans, putting together the deal that helped pay off the rest of the Superdome, but also built the arena in Zephyr Stadium and the Hilario Center, all on Dome Stadium bonds. I always thought that that was really interesting government that he did. But just a couple of quick stories. I remember when Dutch Morial was mayor, that Morial was trying for a third term. Now, mayors are only allowed 2 terms, and so it was taken an amendment of the charter. So Morial had this big rally at the Fairmont Hotel, and he invited Edwards, and Edwards, endorsed the concept. And so they were in this big hotel ballroom, and Morial introduced Edwards to say a few things. And in doing so, Morial made a little joke, and he said, Edwards, maybe when we finish, we can go into a hotel room and shoot a little craps. And Edwards comes up and says, Dutch, says, I may not be the smartest man in the world, but I'm smart enough not to gamble with a black politician. and that broke the room, including Morial, who was just doubled over with laughter. Okay. Talking to Jim Brown, former Secretary of State, who used to go to a lot of events. They'd be on the same podium for a lot of events. And he says one time they were in North Louisiana talking to an evangelist type group, and some of the ministers were kind of going after Edwards a little bit for his reputation on womanizing. And Edwards says, look, I don't drink, I don't smoke, 2 out of 3 isn't bad.
John, let's go over to you.
Did you say John?
I said John. Your turn.
Well, I would add a major accomplishment being to stopping the Riverfront Expressway and shifting all of those federal dollars over to the I-49 project. That was very important to economic development of Louisiana, and all those people in Shreveport now can get to New Orleans and have become Saints fans rather than Dallas fans. That was a major accomplishment getting that done, because it had been a long time coming for the state. It was a certain unification thing. Stories about Edwin Edwards, I don't know where to start, and I certainly wouldn't know where to end. Mm-hmm. I do think he would have been a great television game show host. There's no question about it. He was probably had the most razor-sharp wit of anybody I have ever come in contact with, and he learned his oratorical skills from being a teenage minister in the Church of Nazarene in the Marksville area. And he learned how to move an audience, and he also became a biblical expert. A lot of people don't know that. Edwin Edwards, there was not a biblical verse in the Bible that Edwin Edwards did not know. He had quoted out over at you. And that's not the person you would think would be a Bible quoting kind of guy, because he had his hands in our pocket most of the time he was in office. As one contractor told me, the Edwin Edwards' fee schedule for state contracts was very, very reasonable. They only wanted 5%. Why? Dutch Morial's contract for the convention center was higher than the Edwards's. And that's what she said. She claimed that was the case.
Okay. All right. All these wonderful stories. Okay. Norman, let's go over to you.
Yeah, I enjoyed his tremendous sense of humor, as most people did. But he was also serious in the sense that I think he was the king of compromise, the king negotiator. I remember him being called in to settle strikes that seemed to go on and on and on forever. The one strike in particular was the Jefferson Parish teacher strike. They'd come to an impasse, and I think it went weeks without any kind of resolution. The governor came down, and he stayed in the room with them for about 2 days, and they came out and they had a compromise. They had a settlement. And much the same thing occurred when he was called in to settle the bus strike in the city of New Orleans. That had been going on for quite some time. And he was also called in to settle the contract dispute between the sanitation workers and New Orleans city government. But he always kept things in a kind of humorous vein. He never, ever, I don't think you ever saw him I don't think you ever saw him really angry. Not in public anyway. He got angry behind the scenes, but
Oh, no. I saw him really angry several times.
well, thank God I was blessed not to have that experience, John. And I can remember in Paris, and he always made fun of himself that we were at a dinner that the governor was holding for his supporters. I mean, he had about 600 supporters that he'd flown to Paris as part of a junket to thank them for their help during the campaign. And there was a dinner being held at Versailles that night, and we got off the bus, and he got off the bus, and there were heralding trumpets out playing. And, you know, he stopped everybody, and he said, "You hear that? Do you hear that? They don't do that for everybody."
Of course not. Okay, Norm, let's go over to Tyler.
Yeah, kind of following up what the other guy said, that, you know, he was so sharp and could have such a great memory. You know, he would know what you were thinking before you knew what you were thinking. And also following up what Errol said, I've actually working on a story that'll be in the newspaper over the weekend about what he did for New Orleans. But like John, I also felt his tongue in a sharp way against me. You know, there were times when he got mad at me, and one time in particular, he was leaving office in 1996, and my wife had read aloud about him and heard stories from me. And so I thought to introduce him at an event, sort of as a goodbye event at Gallier Hall, as he was leaving office the final time. So we're in a waiting line, in the reception line, and we finally get up to him. And he looks at my wife and says, and points to me and says, "Are you married to that ass?" But you know, I have very, very conflicted feelings about him, and I have to say, you know, where I sort of feel like in a lot of ways it was a wasted opportunity. Given his incredible intelligence and political deftness, you know, where did he move the state forward? How much did he really do so? You know, you see where we are today and where the state was when he left office versus where when he took office. And I really kind of think it was a wasted opportunity, given all his political skills of what he could have done for Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
We hear that from so many people, you know, a waste of opportunity. And certainly he did have a razor-sharp wit, and so many quotes that he's left behind, too, that we all enjoy remembering. This was great. Great discussion. Thanks so much, guys. Really enjoyed it. Good
You're
to see
welcome.
you all. Thank
Good
you all
to see
for
you.
watching. Good to see you, too, Norm. Thank you all for watching. Of course, we'll be back again
Even
next
you,
week for
Norm.
Informed Sources. All right. Y'all take care.
You do the-
Have a good evening.
Ciao.